Good afternoon, good evening, good night. Wherever it is that you are, welcome to our new Center for Global Management seminar. Today, we are extremely proud and very fortunate to have Professor Chris Tang with us, who is going to talk to us how the global supply chain structure is likely to change or has already been changing because of the pandemic. Professor Tang is one of the world authorities on the subject. He has been at UCLA for uh, some time. He has been your professor. Many of you have taken his courses. And he is a world authority on issues of supply chain and other difficult management questions. He's consulted for a number of multinational firms, for countries, for all sorts of entities. He's been the editor of some of the most important journals. And we are very fortunate to have him today or tonight with us. And he will give a talk. We will follow the same format that we have had in our previous talks. Professor Tang will deliver his presentation, and then we will open up for a conversation. And I will moderate that conversation, and I will take advantage of the prerogative of the moderator and will ask Professor Tang one or two questions, very difficult ones, mind you, Chris. And then we will take your questions through Slido as in the previous meetings that we've had. So you'll have the number for the Slido. Let me repeat that to you. Give me a second. The code, if you didn't jot it down, is 82749. And I will collect the most popular and most interesting question, and I will conduct our conversation with Professor Tang. So, Chris, it's in your hands. Go ahead, please.
This presentation is dedicated to all healthcare providers around the world for their bravery and commitment to save lives. It won't be easy. You think it's strange when I try to explain how I feel, that I still need your love after all that I've done. These three verses capture how I have been feeling for quite some time. Let me give you the background before I start this presentation. In 2001, we experienced the September 11 event, the disruptions to the supply chain. And then we have seen a lot of disruptions through SARS, Mattel recalls, Boeing 787 developments, and the Thai flood in 2011. So in 2012, I worked with my colleague, Mohan Sodhi, a professor at City University London, and he's also graduates from UCLA in 1994. So we wrote a book on managing supply chain risks. Is really try to tell people, companies, how to prepare themselves for the next disaster. Well, nothing happened since 2012. Supply chain is moving smoothly, and I have been a very lonely person for 8 years. But things have changed. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, since March, if you look at the Google Trends, the term broken supply chain hits the roof. So I have been quite busy since then, like the Energizer bunnies. Basically, that is, since then, I have been contacted by the government, by the press, by the school, by colleagues, by companies, and try to talk about in terms of how to manage the supply chain to restore the operations. So I've written articles in the Forbes magazines, at Barron's, and also that I did some work for the California Governor's Office about allocation of vaccines and treatments when they become available. And be interviewed about LA Times about PPEs and the food supply chain, and also about the medicine, about the Gilead's, the treatments for the COVID. Taking a step back, what I'd like to share with you is what we have all observed about the supply chains have been broken for the last few months. And then we try to examine, I try to understand why this is happening, what are the underlying causes, and what we can learn from these lessons. And then moving forward, how we can do better, prepare for the future. Let me begin with this first example about the shortage of toilet paper that we all are fully aware of that. Now, this started by the concern from the healthcare professionals. They were chatting online about the concern about not enough toilet papers, surgical masks, and other PPEs. Since then, the consumers got hold of the concerns of the professionals. Then they tried to rush out to get more toilet paper. Of course, the government said that, oh, we have plenty of toilet paper. But we have to keep in mind, people are a bit worried, they panic, and also more people, they work at home and stay at home. So therefore, they need more toilet papers to work and also work at home. So therefore, they need more toilet paper. So you can see that over 75% of the toilet papers were out of stock in many supermarkets. So that's the example, we're fully aware of that. Now, but that is only the beginning. We're seeing more other problems. Second one, based on the reports from the healthcare providers, we realize that there is really insufficient PPEs to support the daily work to protect them, like shields, like masks, like gowns, or N95 masks. So because of shortages, it's very unfortunate some of the healthcare providers died because they did not have adequate protection. And then, of course, we also recently realized there is also a shortage of meat because the closures of Smithfield and Tyson. Then now the question is could people start wondering, why is this happening? As a nation of plentiful, how could this be happening? Then, of course, they're depending on different types of response. Let us try to understand why this is happening before we can talk about solutions. Well, I can think of different reasons. One of the reasons could be there was really no clear planning beforehand. So, for example, before the pandemic started, did we actually take a step back to identify what are the risks that may occur? So, for example, if the COVID-19 ID become a pandemic, how would that affect the supply from local supplies as well as global supplies? When and where and who will be affected? And also the process risks in terms of the supply may close, exports may ban because different countries may need to protect their own citizens, which is very rational. And also that we may also have imports bans because worry about the further infection through the transportation. And also in terms of factory closures within the United States. So we have to think about the supply and the process. And on top of that, we also need to think about the demand. Which type of products the demand may surge, like PPEs, like thermometers, which type of products may the demand will go down. So I don't think there's a huge demand for the Louis Vuitton handbags right now. So therefore, we have to plan about what is at risk. So that is where we have to do the risk assessment. The risk assessment, we have to think about for which group. Is it for the healthcare sectors, for the business sectors? Now, business sector, we have to think about the domino effect, because when the closure of shopping mall it could affect the retailers. Retailers are not selling products, then it will affect the suppliers. When the suppliers will further affect the upstream. So in that case, we have to think about this contagion effect as well. And also, how would that affect the citizens, the elderly, the young people, and also the sick? So in the case, we have to examine what is the likelihood that will occur, certain events, and also what is impact. Once I understand the magnitude of the risk, then we think about, can we develop contingency plan in terms of stockpiling some critical inventories, and also in terms of, is any way to source locally for the local needs. So after that, if we have the contingency plan, then in the case we can deploy the contingency plan should the events become a serious problem. Now, but I don't need to convince you. It seems the current response, shall we say, is not well coordinated. So basically, I think that we felt that there is no coherent communication, coordination, collaboration among different agencies, different parties. And also on top of that, I'm not sure that we have actually very timely and accurate information about supply and demand and who is doing what, when, where, and how. So when you don't have a clear, coordinated response, problems will continue to pop up. So right now, the government is asking support from private and companies and citizens, which is something is needed. So currently, we have companies asking help from citizens. So for example, for the PPEs, the healthcare providers asking the private citizens to sew some masks to help them. And also now Haynes and Brooks Brothers, they're making masks and some gowns, but they're not equipped to make the N95 mask because it required non-woven materials. So that is not easily accessible right now in the US. Then, of course, we also have private companies such as Anheuser-Busch making hand sanitizer, which is needed. And then the government has asked Ford and GE to make the ventilator, which is also needed. But the type of ventilator they can make quickly may not be the electrical one, it could be a mechanical one. And also GM is also helping. So in a way that it is gratifying to see that the private companies are coming forward to help. So then the question now, we said that given the response we have observed, then the question is, what have we learned? What have we learned and how can we do better? So it is a wake-up call that we'll learn as a nation. Right now, there are different types of leaders, and some may actually blame acts of nature, blame other countries, but blaming is no use right now during a crisis. We need solution. We need workable solution. So therefore, I think that we need to take a step back to try to understand how do we get to this point? How can we move forward? If you look at the trends since the 1980s, there was a big push for globalization, deindustrialization, and frictionless supply chains. So as a result, we can see that the number of jobs because of offshoring, outsourcing, has declined from 18 million people up to 11 million people as of reported in 2020, which is only 3% of our population in the United States that work in the manufacturing sector. I don't need to convince you that this is way too low. Now, then the question is how do we get here? Well, I think that in the 80s, United States realized that they cannot compete with Japan on quality. So therefore, they're thinking about to compete on cost and also go global. So by doing that, they at the same time, they can leverage the economic reform in China to get it to produce products very cheaply, and also so that they can produce global and also sell global. So it has created a lot of benefits, to be sure. So corporations have benefits a lot, and we have many more billionaires now we observe, especially in the United States. And consumers like us, we have cheaper products such as television and also into computer products and our clothes. And also has really lifted over close to 800 million people out of poverty in China, and also many millions more in other developing countries. But we have left many people behind. In the United States, we have a lot of job loss, especially for the blue collar workers. They're left behind and we have neglected them. So I think it's time for us to think about what we can do for them. And also, it's really rather sad that we lost the manufacturing capability. Not only the manufacturing capability, because once you lose that, you gradually lose the design capability and maybe even research and development capability. This is what we already witnessed about the N95 mask, because we have not really focusing on that. Then the question is that what can we learn from this? I think that we need to think about supply chain risk that has been neglected for a long time. So the risk, why don't we pay attention to risk? I have asked this question for the last 20 years. And I've observed two things. One is that I learned from the psychologist that most people, they have optimism bias. That means that they recognize good news, even bad news, they still think that it's not them. It's just because it just won't happen to them. Second is also attitude, because the advancements of information technology, because of offshoring, because of outsourcing, the companies as well as consumers, now that they only focus on the information flow, on our cell phone, on the computers, we have to believe that we have accustomed to the point that is, if we click and then information flow, then we trigger the material flows, then things will just appear at our doorstep. Well, this will work during the good times. When we have a crisis, like what we observe right now, then we have a problem. Information flow does not equal material flows. Yes, we click. We click on Amazon many times, but our products are not available. Then the question is that even if it's available, we discover many of them are not effective or fake. So now the question is that where can we go from here? Based on the recent survey and my also search on the Google Trends, there's a big search on reshoring. 60% of Americans believe that it's about time to bring the jobs back home for manufacturing. But the question is that, is this the solution? I don't have all the answer, but I would like to share my views about this. I think traditionally speaking, most people think about a simple product. If it's simple commodity type, America is a great country. We don't need to do the donkey work and let other countries do it. So in the case, we believe in offshoring or outsourcing. For the innovative product, not fashion, in terms of high-tech products, very avant-garde products, we do it onshore within the US because it's more responsive to the market. Now, this that means that there are two types of supply chain. One efficient one is a focus on cost. Then you can do offshore and outsource. But then the other type is really very technical and very important. And in that case, you do onshore. But I claim that this framework has a missing gap. There is a missing type of products. They are basic, but they can be important in crisis. So I put this product in the middle. I will call that this is a mission critical product. Let me give you an example. Let me borrow an idiom from a Chinese idiom. Water that is far away cannot be used to put out fire nearby. Water is a commodity, but you don't have it at the moment in the crisis, you have a problem. So therefore, given we have the third product type, so we need the third type of supply chain. I call this hybrid. That means we need to do both. That means that we need to produce some of the products to compete on cost, but also we need to have some capability domestically to produce just in case of we need it. So for example, would be like some of the mission critical products such as PPEs, thermometers, even drugs, or some of the active ingredients. So I think it would be very important to keep that in mind. Now, here are some ideas I'd like to share with you in terms of ways to manage supply chain risk moving forward. First of all, transparency is important. All right. Let me give you one example, toilet paper. During the crisis, consumers do not know that 80% of toilet papers are made in the United States. And actually, a lot of materials can be sourced from United States or Canada. The shortage is not because there's not enough capability. The shortage is due to because of the home use. There's a sudden switch from the commercial use because we go to work to the use at home. So the toilet paper they use in office buildings, at the airport and whatnot is different from the home use. I guess it's not as soft. Now, for the manufacturing companies such as P&G or Kimberly-Clark, the manufacturing process is based on batch process. So that means that they used to produce for the commercial use, they need to retool the machinery and the equipment such that they can change over to the home use because the roll is smaller and also the types of paper will be different. That's why it takes some time. The manufacturing process is not that flexible, but they have all the capability to produce. Had the consumer aware of this capability, then we'll be less panicky. Second one, I think that is we need to have a risk management program put in place such that we have a contingency plan that we can deploy in case of emergency. So I think this is a wake-up call we must consider. The third one, we talk about the hybrid supply chain, okay? So this is for the product that is mission critical and is not that expensive. We just need a little bit of redundancy, just a little bit flexibility can make a big difference. So please allow me to use an analogy, BMW i3. BMW i3 is a hybrid. It has a small gas tank. It's only for 2 gallons. Why? In case you run out of electricity, in case you're not near the charging stations, that little gallon, 2 gallon gas can keep you going for a long time because 2 gallons can get you to the next gas station. You can continue your journey. So therefore, in case of emergency, this hybrid idea can go a long way. Now, this also creates opportunities for us to reconsider innovations. Because after the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to consider how to create more safe environments in the factory. So advanced robotics can help, 3D printing can help, also blockchain can enable us to have better supply chain visibility. Last but not least, I think it's about time for governments to think about a certain role in terms of forming partnership with companies to at least to establish some capability of medical supplies and humanitarian relief efforts in the United States that will enable us to ensure business opportunity. Now, let me give you a couple of examples in terms of the current developments in innovations and regulations. In terms of innovations, Nissan in Tennessee, they're now using 3D printer to print the medical shield. So it has been very successful. In Hong Kong, I'm very proud of as well, is a leading company in making clothes. Now they have developed a washable mask that can be used for 30 times, reusable. That will enable us to reduce, reuse, and recycle. I think it's wonderful. At the same time, the Senate is pushing for a new initiative, a new bill that will ensure that the medicine supply chain would be under some federal government control. At least some of the products would be done in the United States. So I think that it could be a welcome initiative. Now, to summarize what I have learned, what I have thought about it. So I think that why do we have this problem? I think that we just did not have the adequate planning to manage supply chain risk. So it's about time for us to think about how to develop a better plan. What we learned, I think to complete reshore is not practical because we lost a lot of capability. Even we bring all these manufacturing back in the United States, we cannot be competitive. So United States need to have a hybrid supply chain. We need a global supply chain to sustain the economic growth for the United States. But we, at the same time, we need some hybrid supply chain that improve employment and also national security and also create innovation opportunities. Now, how can we do better? So I think the supply chain risk management program we should put in place. And also that we need to explore new technologies that we have. Besides 3D printing, we can also think about using drones for deliveries, which is Amazon is exploring. And also that's in terms of IoT to keep a track. And also that we can use online platforms. Right now, I'm discussing with the LA County Food Security Task Force and Salesforce, a company, they're coming forward to consider building an online platform to match supply and demand for food in LA County. And also that's, I think that the governments need to provide incentives to encourage companies to come forward so that they can form partnership to make these supply chains more secure in the future. So to summarize, I think that the broken supply chain can be fixed after the COVID-19 pandemic. It is my hope that we can restore the supply chain operations so that I can continue be the lonely guy at UCLA. So in closing, I wish all of you and your loved ones safe and well. And I would also like to borrow a quote from Queen Elizabeth. We should take comfort that while we may still have more time, more things to endure, better days will return. Thank you very much.
Chris, thank you so much. I cannot get my video going. I get but you can hear me, can you?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, so, okay, start my video. No, maybe the host can, maybe Ricky can start. Otherwise, I'll just ask you questions. I have the slider here. You don't have to see me. So thank you so much for a wonderful, very interesting presentation. Fantastic slides. I love your slides. I'm going to copy them going forward.
I hope you like my singing too.
Yeah, well, that I was going to talk about that as well. I cannot start my video, so I won't try again. So let me start by asking you a question about your idea of managing supply chain risk, which I think it's a very, very important topic and principle. And then you say we have to build a little bit of redundancy. What's a little bit of redundancy? How do we know how little it is? And let me be maybe a bit specific in a particular piece of equipment that I am quite familiar with, and that's a respirator. A few years ago, my grandson was born with a heart condition, and he had to have surgery at age 1 week. And he was in the ICU for 1 month, attached to a respirator. And I visited him 2 or 3 times a day at UCLA hospital. So I know the machine. It hasn't been used on me. So how many, for instance, a little bit of redundancy in respirators, what would that mean from a practical point of view? 330 million people in this country. How many respirators should we have?
Very good question, Sebastian. Actually, this is a type of the work that myself and my colleagues in operations management do. So basically, that's first, we have to understand the demand. Some of the basic demands are basically predictable, like in terms your grandson's conditions. So we have historical data, then we can actually forecast in terms of how much do we need by states. So in that case, we can look at in terms of the inventory we need to put in stock. That's point number 1. So some redundancy. Second, some redundancy can be shared. So that is what Governor Cuomo was suggesting, that maybe we share the ventilators across states, because during the normal time, you can share across states. That will also reduce the inventory as well. Third, we can also run the stress test, because you can run different scenarios. You have to do scenario planning. So for under the normal kind of healthcare conditions, we have historical data. We can actually estimate how much inventory we need. Now, what I'm talking about, the COVID ID, that is a different disruption. What I want to argue is that this is not something we can have the probability has historical data, but we can triangulate based on different experts to think about different scenarios. Instead of just believing a single number, most of my colleagues who teach statistics believe in different confidence intervals. We need to plan different scenarios. We'll be like, is it a local pandemic, nationwide, or statewide, or this? Then we can think about how much time we need to borrow before the new ventilators can come in. So therefore, we can do the scenario planning, we can run the stress test, so therefore we can actually determine how much inventory we need.
Okay, great answer. I wanted you to say that you're, and my colleagues in the operations research field exactly deal with these issues. So let me ask you a question that has come up in the Slido and is related, and I will sort of reframe it in a little bit. It has to do with your third type of supply chain, the hybrid one. And it was not completely clear to me if hybrid meant that each company would supply itself from different sources geographically, or that as a nation, we would get, say, 80%. Now we're getting 100% from China. Now we would get only 80% because it's hybrid. So the question that is in Slido, we are very much more expensive than our foreign partners and suppliers. How do you distribute this 80-20 that would come in your hybrid, or 70-30, or however you want to put it? Who gets the inexpensive stuff, and who gets to pay for the cost of the more expensive? How do we distribute the cost of this extra cost of going hybrid rather than outsourcing?
Thank you. It's a great question. First of all, I wanted, it's exactly right. What I meant by hybrid is that some of the bulk of the product is still made overseas because they can be produced at a lower cost. But the small proportion that for the mission critical products, not all products, I argue that it should have some capability to make in the United States, such as N95 masks, even some thermometers. Do you know 90% of thermometers they make in China? In case of crisis, we don't even have thermometers. So I think we need to have some capabilities. Now, then of course, the cost will be higher. No question about that.
Well, that is a question that is in Slido. Are Americans willing to pay?
Yeah. That is where the government needs to work with the private companies. One could be through tax incentives. Second, maybe subsidies. Third one is also in terms of a company can use this as a branding strategy. They say, hey, our thermometer is more expensive, but please buy from us because we are more creating jobs in the United States. There are consumers actually willing to pay a little more to support that.
Okay, so let me now ask you the second most popular question. What is the role of geography in your supply chain, in your managing the supply chain risk proposition? For instance, would Mexico get in if your approach is enacted, would it become a more important supplier because it's just across the border and it's easier to get there? Is there a geographical thing involved, or is it completely independent of geography?
Very good question. So I think that the two layers of hybrids. The first one is that I still argue that for national security, we should maintain some capability in the United States. Second, I think that we need to take advantage of our neighbor. So yes, Mexico is one of them, and also Canada is another one of them. Because of geographic proximity, in case of emergencies, at least we can drive to Mexico to buy something. If it's from China, there's no way. So therefore, I think that we should actually to build a stronger alliance with our neighbor, such as Canada and Mexico. So that's why now many companies actually still viewed Mexico is a very important manufacturing partner, such as automotive industry.
Okay, great, Chris. So you pointed out and I pointed out that we can drive to Mexico, and most of the trade with Mexico is done on trucks. So the trucking industry is very important. But there are several of our viewers that are interested in the cargo industry by sea, and container companies, and shipping companies. Most of them are multinational, though they have Panamanian or other flags. What do you think will, the question is, how do you see the future of maritime transportation and cargo? And as a consequence of the big ports, the port of LA here is one of the largest and most efficient in the world.
Very good question. I think that in terms of ocean freights, now that there's a new revolutions coming, now they are trying to become more efficient because they realize that they need to compete. So with like Maersk and IBM, there's a partnership using blockchain technology so that to make the ocean freight process go faster, including the getting all the necessary paperwork. Now, but if we can develop as a little bit, but I think that the ocean freight, the sea cargo will continue to play an important role because the bulk of the volume. So that will continue to stay. Then at the same time, I think that our port operation is improving. And I think that's to shorten the lead time in emergencies, we need to rely on air cargo. So that's why right now we still don't have enough masks from China because the air cargo is the bottleneck. So I think in the future, we also need to think about how airlines need to reconfigure the aircraft much more efficiently. Right now, it's really wonderful to see Lufthansa in Germany. They actually removed all the passenger seats and converted their commercial aircraft into air cargo airplane. So I think that I hope the airlines can come up with a new design with Boeing, and so that they can reconfigure the configuration of the aircraft, either shift from air cargo to passengers and back and forth.
What about trucking, which is the other side of the freight, sea freight and trucking? Is there a blockchain, I suppose, can also be applied for the paperwork?
Yes.
But what other kind of technological revolutions are we seeing
For
there?
ocean freights, I think that the ocean liner is still need to run for the big boats. Now, for the land transportation, there's really a sea change is going to happen very soon. These are autonomous vehicles. Because many companies, including China, they already experimenting the long haul in terms of using autonomous vehicle, and this would be happening pretty soon.
What about the when we talk about supply chain for the U.S., what comes to mind to most people immediately is China. It's not the only one. We already talked about Mexico and Canada, but China comes to mind. How do you see the trade war developing? We're in an election year. It's not a big surprise that the China rhetoric will be part of the election. Most people, or many people, thought that the trade war was going to be solved before the election because it was going to provide an economic boom, a stock market boom. But now maybe it's going to be the opposite. How being a keen observer of Sino-American relations at the business and technological level? What do you see?
Very good question. I have serious concerns. We started with the trade war of the United States with China. But to me, this is a rather unfair accusation because China actually never asked United States to source from them. Maybe we should ask the senior management, why do we source from China? There are other countries. So that's why I think we need to take a step back. Why? Second one, I'm concerned because we've seen through history, given I was born in Hong Kong, where we know the history, a lot of time trade war can turn into Cold War. Once a Cold War, it can become a real war. We've seen it in the Opium War in China. So if you go back through history, the concerns we have is similar to the professor at Harvard, Graham Allison, written his wonderful book. It's called Thucydides' Trap. It talks about a rising nation is challenging the ruling nation. So one is want to really moving up like China. The other ones want to maintain the status quo like United States. When the relationship is not managed carefully, it could run into a complication and also conflicts. That's something that's I do not want to see. So I think that United States and China need to come to terms with each other, think about in terms of mutual understanding and mutual respect. And there are many ways to resolve this conflict, if I may, to suggest.
Great. There is a wonderful question here by Jorge, and I'm going to rephrase it to make it more challenging, I guess. So, part of your, if I understand correctly, your management of the supply chain risk is determining what is essential from a national security perspective, where national security is a very broad term and includes, of course, public health and the like. Who gets to determine what is critical from a national security perspective? One proposal is that we name a committee and you chair it. I would be very happy with that. And you would be the chairman. But if politically we cannot get agreement on almost anything in this country, who's going to determine whether thermometers are, you and I agree that they are critical, but maybe someone else thinks that they are not? How do we do this from a political, practical, efficient, and fair perspective?
Okay, this is my take. Thank you. Well, I think that's United States is very different from other country. The way I see it is rather decentralized. So instead of waiting for top leadership to figure out what is the critical, what is not. So I think that there can be develop some grassroots movements such that to form consortium with the private, public, and also in terms of getting citizens involved to try to understand what are the implications of certain important products. So for example, let me use active pharmaceutical ingredients. A lot of consumers do not know that would be like the cholesterol lowering pills, statin, ibuprofen, and penicillin. Most of them are actually made in China. In most of the time, they are rather safe, but occasionally we have witnessed that there are risks that we have observed heparin that was tempered and also would be adulterated with a risky substance. Then some patients actually die from it. So I think for some of the pharmaceutical products, I think the consumers need to think about the risks that we're taking. So I think that the FDA need to work with the consumer advocates group to reconsider what are the important products we need to have oversights. So I think the Senate's, the new movements about the bill to have some oversights about the medical supply chain is a good step forward.
Yeah, well, if you get Marco Rubio and Elizabeth Warren talking to each other, it means that there may be some agreement across the aisle.
That's right.
As I was looking at the questions, and there's an interesting one which I don't know how important it is for this country, but I'm very interested in your opinion. What about railways in this new normal going forward, and new critical management of supply chain risk? Do you see a greater role for railways? For instance, I don't know if we have any efficient railways going to Mexico. So is there any role, or is this really not in the cards?
Well, I think that in terms of railroads, well, I'm afraid that United States is not very efficient in managing this kind of public projects. For instance, the bullet train from Los Angeles to San Francisco, which has been already talked about for over 10 years, and it will cost many billions of dollars. For 10 years, China has built the entire bullet train railroad network for the entire nation. Now they extended the railroad network all the way to Central Asia. They push all the way to Europe and then to Africa. So in that case, I think United States, I think that we cannot really rely on the public sectors, the governments to build this kind of infrastructure, unless that we have a really a new organizational structure. So I think that we cannot even build a simple bullet train from Los Angeles to San Francisco. I don't see how we can build a network to Mexico.
Okay. What about regulation and supply chain efficiency? So the concern that I'm reading through the questions, Chris, is that everything that you say makes sense, but everything that you say is costly. And so some of the questions, the way I read them, are that they are saying, okay, let's go ahead on the safety side, but let's try to find other ways of reducing costs. For instance, Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, other type of regulation. Do you see a trade-off, or you see that in your view, needed extra costs of managing the supply chain risk just will come on top of the costs that we have now, and there's nothing or very little we can do about it? Or do you think that there are other areas where we can sort of chip costs away in order to offset what we're going to do on the safety side?
Well, there are studies that in terms of cost of production, I think there's some misunderstanding. For many products, actually, producing in China is not that much cheaper, because you have to think about transportation, you have to think about in terms of environmental impact, and also that you have to think about all the import tax and whatnot. So many consulting firms, they have done many comparisons. For certain products, actually producing in the United States is not that much more expensive. Give you one example, drugs. Drug manufacturing is actually very cheap. I've done some project for Amgen. The bulk of the cost is go to R&D, billions of dollars. To produce Ibogen for other drugs is virtually zero. So basically that we have to keep in mind that different products have a different supply chain for different cost structure. And also some of these products can be save lives. And also we have a nearby production capability. So therefore, I argue that is moving some of this manufacturing back to the United States does not necessarily increase costs. That's point number one. Point number two is that if we can leverage innovations, and we can actually keep the costs down, because if we get the design and manufacturing really within the same proximity, we can actually leverage the concept of design for manufacturing. It has been a proven concept that if you put the design and the manufacturing side by side, you can actually reduce costs tremendously. So therefore, the cost does not need to go up, because right now, I think the audience is thinking about everything in silo, in function silo. When you integrate everything, actually you can generate the benefits to reduce costs. Third, I think as a nation, if you care about the fellow citizens, don't you think that it's also good to pay a little bit more to support each other? So why don't we do that? And also, I think it's about time to reflect what is a nation.
Great answer, Chris. Let me share with you an experiment that I've been performing during the last couple of weeks. I mentioned this last week when Professor Ed Leamer gave his talk. So I have lots of friends I talk to over Zoom, as I'm sure you do, and they all say what we have discovered is the wonderful job that teachers do. And in particular, my friends that have to homeschool their children say, oh man, this is the most difficult thing I've done in my life. And these people that work in all sorts, primary schools in particular, grade schools, do fantastic job. We should pay them more. And then I ask them, are you willing to pay more in property taxes? And they all say, no, we are not willing to pay more in property taxes, but we want to pay our teachers more. So there's something there that doesn't add up. And I think that is related to what many of our viewers have been asking in your talk, which is, will people pay more? So let me ask you the first question that we got on Slido. How do we build a more ethical, morally solid supply chain structure after we have gone through the crisis?
Well, I think that this one, it depends on companies. I hope there are different types of companies. Some type of companies, they care about competing on cost, then they may sacrifice on the quality and also social responsibility and environmental sustainability. But there are companies are not willing to sacrifice on that. They want the company to become more environmental friendly and also more socially responsible. So for example, Coca-Cola, they have a 5 by 20 initiative. They try to lift 5 million women out of poverty by 2020. I have to check the report whether they accomplished that or not. And Patagonia in Oxnard, and they care about in terms of recyclable, reusable, and all reduction of consumption. So there are companies, they charge you more, but and yet they are willing to produce product that is environmentally friendly. So the question is that there are companies willing to do that, and there are consumers willing to pay more for that. So therefore, it will segment the market. So in that case, I hope that the public will gradually shift it to support those companies. They are more socially responsible, they're more ethical, they're more environmentally friendly. So I think that the question we should ask ourselves, because if we are the market, if the consumer form the market, company will respond. So I think it's chicken egg problem. So therefore, before the chicken egg problem, we need some interventions. That's why I think the government can get the ball rolling to start some initiative to kickstart this initiative.
Great answer. I think that the fair trade coffee that many of us drink, and we make an effort to actually purchase coffee that is fair trade certified. And we know that people who grow it in Guatemala or other Kenya or Tanzania, they are being paid a higher price and they are taking care of the environment. Chris, it's been a wonderful evening. I have to ask you one more question before I thank you and I ask you to sing again, maybe. It seems to me that your colleagues and your profession has spent the last 20 or maybe more years developing amazing programs for companies that have adopted the combination of just-in-time production and just enough inventory. And what you're saying seems to me that it's very original because it backtracks in a way and changes that approach, the just in time and just enough, to a different one, which is both nostalgic in some way, but at the same time, very futuristic. And I would like you to end by giving us a little bit reflection on, from a professional, scholarly, academic point of view, how does it feel that you guys have been, I mean, maybe I'm completely wrong, but that's my, spent 30 years building these beautiful models, and now, we went too far. now it's time to go back a little. Is that a fair description of what's going on here?
Well, Sebastian, you're such a brave man, of course. Let me just make a couple comments and we end. So I think in the 80s, when we decided to become lean, to become efficient, to compete on cost, to compete on quality, so we adopted the just-in-time concepts that were started by the Toyota production system. But at the time, we were thinking that actually we are aware of the following. The Toyota production system is perfect system if everything is stable. Stable workforce, stable demand, stable supply workforce, and stable suppliers. But then, as we do more global supply chain, then we realize that I argue that the Japanese production system will not work because the Japanese production system rely on very reliable suppliers. They help each other. They are really work as one. But when you do the global supply chain to source from offshore or outsource to countries such as India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, now all the way to Ethiopia, they have different culture, different ways of working, different types of law enforcement, different regulations. So therefore, one size does not fit all. So the just-in-time idea would not work in this kind of global decentralized supply chain. So therefore, I am pushing for you do just in time, but also need some just in case inventory, some spare capacity, some redundancy, some flexibility, such that will buy you time so that you can your supply chain become more resilient, then you can restore the operations much faster.
I like that. Just in case, just enough, just in time. Chris, you've been wonderful. I have to ask you, will you sing again for us?
No.
Okay, good.
Because it's too early in the morning in Europe, because I have some of my friends already watching this at 2 a.m.
Okay, but we have to thank you. This has been wonderful. We had an amazing number of viewers, and as you have not only fulfilled our expectations, but greatly surpassed them. And I'm very happy that I persuaded you to give this talk. Thank you so much again. And I hope to see you soon in person.
Thank you very much for having me.
In the meantime, stay healthy and informed.
Thank you.